Hi, my name is Lisa Pearson and I am the Trust-wide Suicide Prevention Lead at Northamptonshire Healthcare Foundation Trust. Thanks for tuning in and listening. These are a set of recordings called Let's Talk About Suicide. At the very beginning, I just wanted to give a warning that actually we talk and use the word suicide throughout these recordings. This may not be the right time for you to listen to these, so please think about your well-being. And if it's appropriate, please switch off and come back at a later date. Just make sure that you're feeling okay to listen to the content. Thanks so much for coming today. Today our podcast is going to be around talking about hope and interruption in suicide prevention. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Andy Willis. I'm a lived experience lead for NHFT. Also, it's an area that I'm passionate about. I get the privilege to do some contributions, lived experience contributions to the National Suicide Prevention Alliance and also with the Samaritans Lived Experience Advisory Group.
And I'm Paul Fleck, and I'm the Trust's chief psychologist.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. So, with all of the recordings we've done, we've asked all our guests to answer a question at the beginning. Andy, why do you think it's so important that we talk about suicide?
Well, I think for me personally, in terms of mental health and wider, it's a public health issue. There's nothing more important for me because it's a matter of life and death. It sounds a little bit melodramatic, but it is that. And yeah, obviously I've got some emotional engagement in this. I think it's such an important topic because people can get to that other place. Things can look very different, and in that moment, when that sad event happens, so many people are impacted. But first and foremost, the person, there is no future for them. So it's vital. It's a massively important topic.
Well, thank you, Andy. Paul, how would you answer the question?
I think I would say suicide, there's still a lot of stigma, and so people either are afraid to ask about it, but also people are afraid to talk about it or disclose they might be having sort of suicidal thoughts or feelings. And the more we can talk about it, the more we break down the stigma and we make it more okay to have those conversations. And so I think both ways around, or for all the different groups, for somebody who might be experiencing suicidal thoughts, for staff who work in mental health or don't work in mental health, for the public more broadly, the more we can make it more, in a way, normal, every day.
Thank you. So today we're talking about hope and interruption, and we've chosen it as one of our recording topics. And the reason we've done that is that I think me and Andy do some coaches training, and we've discovered that actually this is a really, really important message that we want to get out to people in our communities, that we can make a difference. So Andy, if I asked you why hope and interruption is so important in suicide prevention?
I think if I take the hope one, there's a whole welter of personalised factors that lead somebody to that place. Their emotions, whether they're suffering from mental illness or not, just the emotions they're dealing with day to day, the factors. The reason I put that there, something from my lived experience, is a feature of losing hope that things can get better, feeling stuck in the enduring diagnosis, for example. It's such a crucial aspect, not just of recovery, but to have a different way of thought, having some hope and regaining some hope and having some realistic hope that things can change, can be different, the problems you perceive can actually be supported and can be different over time. Massively important. We hope such an important ingredient. In terms of an interruption, I think you can't predict it, but you can do as much as you possibly can to prevent an interruption. It might be an interruption just in the sense of a conversation with somebody, to interrupt their thoughts. They may not be at that place of planning and that more dramatic interruption, but so any conversation is an interruption and provides an opportunity for support. But if we're looking at that moment where perhaps the person is in that place, as perhaps at a certain location, and that interruption at the more dramatic sense, crucial, because you can be taken out of that place, you can be taken out with that interruption, and then people can be having the sort of conversation Paul was talking about, and having just validating the place the person's in and starting to talk around some support. Without the interruption, that wouldn't happen. So in my own lived experience of the 7 attempts that I've made to die by suicide, once the interruption came from myself, that on the last of the 7, I reached out for help. On all of the others, they were all different. whether they were driven by psychosis, whether they were driven by factors in terms of my emotions that were all different, but every one of them could have been interrupted. And probably the best example that I can give, when I was really, when we looked at this once before, Lisa, I reflected back, and it was simply when I was in rented accommodation, had gone into that place in terms of the planning, the means were there, and I was absolutely on that moment of that action. Door knocked, and it was my daughter. Before I opened the door, I got rid of the means. I was immediately interrupted out of that thought. I had a challenging conversation with her. She was just there to actually do her hair and do a bit of makeup before she went to see her friends. And I was grateful for that. I put a mask on. When she had left, I was back in that place of having suicidal thoughts, thinking, how can I get the means again? But it was different. I didn't suddenly go to a place where I would explore something else. The interruption changed the agenda. So both are crucial. Hope, vital. Interruption, they both prevent.
Thanks, Andy. I think they go hand in hand as well,
Yeah,
don't
they do.
If we can give people hope that they can interrupt as well, so there's a bit of both in there,
Yeah.
isn't there?
Yeah.
Paul, what do you think about hope, interruption and suicide prevention?
So I think Andy's said it from his experience really, really clearly. I think from the perspective of hope, when people start to consider suicide, often they've lost hope. One of the things we sometimes talk about in terms of one of the myths around suicide is that people considering suicide really do want to die. And one of the things we sometimes sort of do to challenge that in a way is to sort of frame suicide as people trying in quite a desperate way to solve a problem. And usually the way that works is they can't think of any other solution because they've lost hope in all those other solutions, if you see what I mean. So it seems like the only way to escape the pain, to escape the situation that they're in. So if you or someone else or the person themselves can introduce even a tiny bit of hope, and we know that when people go into that sort of mindset, their focus tends to narrow, and they tend to be very focused on these sort of immediate feelings and immediate situations. So it's actually quite hard to think of other factors, other perspectives, things that might give them hope, but anything that can nudge the person in that direction could keep them safe. And that's why things like safety planning, helping people ahead of the time think about reasons for living, things they will make them hang on, in a sense, through that difficulty. And also hope doesn't have to be a kind of big picture, sort of complete resolution. It might be hope that things will get a little bit better. It might be hope that they can sort of make it through this day or this particular period. It might be hope that somebody will listen or take them seriously or reach out. So even a small amount of hope, I think, can make a really big difference. I think the interruption bit, the other thing we often talk quite a bit about in terms of myths, is that once someone has made their mind up, and Andy described this really vividly, in a sense, there's nothing you can do. And so in a way, interrupting somebody or preventing them would be pointless because they would just go ahead and find another way. But actually, when you look at the evidence, what we know is that generally people enter a sort of critical kind of window in which they are kind of motivated to act on the thoughts, and that window is relatively short, like measured in hours, and also in that time there's kind of a critical opportunity to interrupt people, and that interruption could become something quite mundane. It doesn't have to be highly skilled, it doesn't have to be a highly trained professional. It might just be somebody asking you about the weather, asking how you're doing, calling around to deliver a parcel or those sorts of things. So anything that might introduce delay or anything that might introduce an interruption, and Andy's example from his own experience really illustrates it, might provide that, and that might just be just enough to nudge the person out of that frame of mind and keep them safe.
I couldn't add any more except to say that in that moment, that very short window, again, it could be different for individuals, but certainly in my experience, that awful self-justification that has justified everything for that moment of action, whatever's prompting that decision, the interruption can come. And you're thinking about the conversation or the knock on the door, you're taken out of that place and you don't immediately return to it. Or you may start thoughts a bit different. Interruption is so important.
So we've spoken to somebody, we've asked them the question, we've done some real compassionate listening. What do you think happens next? What would we do next?
I think if you knew the person, if somebody was having this conversation with me that knew me, what might be hopeful would be that they may reflect, if they know a bit about me, even if they didn't, maybe if they were to ask about how much they were connected to others, they'd get a sense of how isolated, but then to look to build on that and in a way, without stating it as reasons for living, just explore how others not would be impacted, but how you've got other people to get that hopefulness to recover for. Not in any heavy-handed way, but just to bring in the dimension. It would also be very, particularly if you knew the person, and perhaps if you didn't, to be curious around it, if they've got any ways that they've kept themselves safe. You know, this whole hope to get through this next 6 hours, this next 24, then reflecting in a slightly different space about people that they're connected to, hopefully, or things that they've done or could do to keep themselves safe. That for me would be very productive. You would probably already have done enough, but if the opportunity arose, I would have found that very helpful, because it would have taken me even further out of that mindset, and it would have certainly been useful. And in the place where I did have a safety plan, really important, it might remind me, if it's only, I should have phoned the system before I got to this place. So anything like that's going to be constructive and part of the hope.
Thanks, Andy. What do you think, Paul?
I think if you've done all those things, I think it's really important to say you've already done a huge amount, and it may well itself save someone's life. So even if that's all you've done, that's a huge thing, and it's often much more than sort of ends up happening. A bit like Andy's saying, I think this is probably easier if you know the person. It's not absolutely necessary to know the person, but it's probably easier if you do. I guess I would be thinking about, at that moment, the person in their sort of mind and in their way of seeing the world is thinking about taking their life as a solution, and possibly as the only solution to the problem they've got. And the problem might be a situation, and the problem is almost always the pain associated with whatever's going on for them. And we know that when people are in that mindset, it's really hard to think of any other solution. They tend to think things will never change, and they tend to underestimate the impact on others of them not existing anymore. And so I think anything you can do to begin to sort of work with the person, to almost say, how do you and me work together to keep you safe from these thoughts, and to begin to think together about maybe there is either some reasons to bring in a little bit of hope, or the possibility of some other kinds of solutions to the problem you're facing. And that, if it's done too soon, can feel a bit like you're trying to move them out of it and kind of just in a way jolly them along. But I think there is a place for that bit of the conversation, because in a way you're bringing in the bits that at the moment they just can't think about or see. And as Andy's saying, that sort of beginnings of who could we talk to, what would keep you safe, what would help you in a way hang on. So even if some of this is just helping a person gather up a bit of resource, almost to see if things change or see if things could change. Because the problem with this solution, if you like, is it's one way. You'll never get to find out if there was any other way. And so if you can begin to sort of work with the person around those sort of ideas, I think that can be the beginnings of what we would call a safety plan.
I think that's so important, isn't it? I think the messages from the Hope and Interruption seem to be very much is that you can make a difference, you can instill hope in others, you can have compassionate conversations, and you can save a life, which we talk a lot, don't we, Andy, about actually that's the ultimate thing that you can do by doing something very simple. So, and I suppose that's the empowering people through listening and talking more around suicide, that they're feeling more able to ask the question, or perhaps identify that perhaps they need to talk to someone as well. Just following on from watching the video and thinking about that, it's a Samaritans video, and again, as I said, we use that in training. We always do a caveat to it, because a lot of the Samaritans training videos around interruption are very much female-led, interrupting the male. We always say that actually you have the power to interrupt, you don't necessarily have to be the person to do the interruption. So it's quite important that you feel safe before you do that. And if you don't feel safe, as long as you follow up on that, you speak to someone and say you're worried about that person, or you bring a family friend, a member, and say, actually, I don't feel I'm in the right place to ask this question, but I'm a bit worried about Bob at the moment. That's still an interruption. So it's more about being aware. So Andy, thinking about how you talk to people that perhaps are feeling hopeless, have you got any advice?
I think the first thing is be prepared to talk to them. For me, if somebody is asking me how I'm feeling, if somebody is asking me that they're going to listen, then that is validation of the thoughts. It may be that they say something along the lines, I can see that you're struggling, or things are slightly different. However they get to that conversation, and even if they ask the question, they say, how safe do you feel from yourself? Have you had any thoughts? It would be normal in this situation for people. I know you've got a lot on your plate. If you know that I'm talking here, then offering that opportunity for the conversation isn't just an interruption. It's space, it's validation. Even in that moment, it's giving a bit of hope that someone's going to listen to you, and it may change. If it was a complete stranger, the example on the video, once the person is asked about the weather, for example, they might, I've not been in that situation, but certainly a situation in a pub where I asked the question, I simply said, look, I'm going to ask you something quite straightforward here. Have you had any thoughts of dying? But please, let's just sit and talk about this. You don't have to say much, I'll just listen. We don't even have to talk about it, we'll just share a cup of tea, a cup of coffee. But when you're in that place, it doesn't suddenly trigger anything else other than to think that somebody cares. You may find it very difficult to articulate, but that alone, you're still in connection with that person. And it would be very unusual for the person who's in that much distress, not to, having been taken out that moment, not to want to just go perhaps physically away from the station platform, or physically or psychologically away from that place, and to just have that normal conversation, even if the person just talks about, if they know they've got an interest in football, just get talking.
Paul, thinking about who do we ask this question of? So is there any particular people that we should be asking this question, or is there any people of concern? How do we know who to ask?
So I guess in a population kind of way, we know some groups are more at risk than others. So we know, for example, men, particularly middle-aged men in certain occupations, are much more likely to take their own lives. But even in those groups, the vast majority of those groups don't go on to do that. So at an individual level, I'd say it's more about, and this is assuming you don't know the person, noticing and to some extent trusting your instincts about someone who looks or you can see is very, very distressed or starts to disclose a high level of distress. So I think in those situations, then it's really important to consider asking that question. And that whole process is, I know we're going to reference the Zero Suicide Alliance training at the end, but I think that whole process is covered really well in that brief training.
And I suppose it's thinking, when we're thinking about interrupting people are quite worried about the next steps, like what do I do? And listening to lots of people who've lived experience that I've worked with, and thinking that's from my experiences, actually you don't necessarily want somebody to do something. It's not about them having to solve the problem or make it all go away. And I think we both talk quite earnestly about that of hope, and actually people caring enough to listen is really important.
And I think I was going to sort of build on what Andy was saying, is I think it's the situation. So if somebody is looking really desperate or distressed, and you ask them and they say they are feeling very hopeless, maybe they even say they are having suicidal thoughts, I think the pressure you often feel is I've got to do something, and I've got to do something right now. And there may be action you do need to take, but what people will also often say is, it really makes a difference to them for someone to listen. And even if it's for a minute, for a couple of minutes before you start thinking about what do I do, taking a bit of time to connect with the person, but also with their distress. Often the person's holding a huge amount of distress and hopelessness they might not have disclosed to anybody very much. And so if you're the person they've disclosed it to, just you listening, connecting with them, empathising with them, being there, will make a big difference, and people often describe that. And I also think people sometimes feel they've got to, if someone feels hopeless, they've got to give them hope. They've got to kind of in a way say, oh, isn't that bad, or here's some reasons that might might make you feel differently, and that might be useful. But if it's done too quickly, it can feel like you didn't get it. And sometimes people say, actually, just somebody saying, yeah, I can see how terrible things are, I can see how awful you feel, you're in really a lot of pain here. Ironically, the person will say that in itself makes them feel a bit better, that in itself makes them feel a bit more hopeful. So that first bit, I think, is really important. That's not to say you then might not need to think about what to do next.
I think that listening in that space, you don't have to put everyone right in that space. You may be able to be curious about if they've got somebody they'd like you to phone, get that connection, or equally with others' support, particularly if it's a situation perhaps where others may be around who can offer the support. Your role is to provide that distance, that listening, that time, and then others who can provide that support, whether it's family, other support can come in. You don't have to carry all of that. You've done your part by just having an interruption, starting that conversation, and being in that place. And it may be that if it's out in the public, and it could be a friend, it could be a real loved one, and sometimes, ironically, people are perhaps more guarded when to ask of friends and family. And something that I would personally use would be, look, I'm going to ask you this because I really love you, I really care about you. A lot of people really care about you. If it was somebody that I knew, and then almost giving myself permission to ask the question, and then I think you could be quite straightforward, or at least to ask and use the words of, are you thinking of dying? Have you had any suicidal thoughts?
I think you talk quite early in our codes of training, don't you, about how important it is to ask the question. It's a bit of a passion for you, is that actually, so when we're talking to people and the audience, a lot of them are saying there's lots of worries around doing that for friends and family, but what you're saying is actually it's just so important, we can't miss that opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. You recognise, Paul mentioned earlier about the stigma and the myths and the barriers. They're there very much in mental health. They're certainly there in this topic, but it should be great if it was as normal as asking somebody if they got a migraine or if they've got something physical. You're feeling unwell, you've not got the flu, have you? It's getting that parity, but recognising that is something that everybody has to individually think about, take the training, Zero Suicide Alliance, and move forward.
At the end of all the recordings, we're asking people to take a pledge. So for World Suicide Prevention Day 2024, the theme is change the narrative, and we really want to tackle the stigma and make more conversations around suicide. So please think about that going forward, and if you could take these conversations and the things that you've learned today and talk to your colleagues and your friends and family about it, this would really work towards the theme of changing the narrative. If you're interested in more training around suicide prevention, Zero Suicide Alliance have free 20-minute training where you're able to take that and learn more about talking to people about suicide. You're able to access this online on zerosuicidealliance.com/training, and you're able to access different modules depending on your interest. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the recording. If you've been impacted by anything that you've heard, please reach out for help. There are people you can talk to. In Northamptonshire, we have a 24-hour mental health number that you can ring on 0800 448 0828. Alternatively, you can ring 111 and press 2 for the mental health option. If you want to talk to somebody, you're able to speak to the Samaritans on a 24-hour basis, and their number is 116 123. If you don't want to speak to someone on the phone and prefer to text somebody, you're able to use the National Shout service, and that number is text 85258. In Northamptonshire, we have a bereavement support service for anyone who's bereaved by suicide called Kelly's Heroes, and you're able to contact them if you want to talk to somebody about your bereavement and you feel you've been impacted on 0800 0025 400. There's also extensive information online that you're able to look up and email them. You're also able to contact survivors of bereavement by suicide, which is a peer support group. You're able to ring them and find out where their nearest group is in Northamptonshire, where you can meet fellow people that have had the same experience of you and get some peer support. Also, we would encourage you to use your social networks and your friends and families and colleagues. It's really important that you may not need to talk to a professional, but you are able to talk to them about how you're feeling and the impact this recording has had on you.